I am a John Jay alumni. I am very happy to be here to answer some of your questions. I was in your seats not too long ago, probably, well, okay, it's been like 10 years, but not too long ago. So I'm excited to answer any questions that you guys have regarding my journey and how I got to my career today. I graduated with my bachelor's in forensic psychology in 2010 and my master's in 2013. I really enjoyed my time at John Jay, and I was really sad that I had to leave. But yeah, so how I got here, when I was I actually, before I went to John Jay, I actually went to a community college for 2 years, and I was a criminal justice major originally because I wanted to be a police officer, like Ed went over. So I decided to do a career change and switch over to psychology. When I was an undergrad, I did do an externship at Metropolitan Hospital and their psychiatry clinic. And then during my master's, I did an externship at King's Supreme Court and Superior Court, and then Queens Criminal Court, just shadowing the psychiatrists and the psychologists down there at the forensic psychiatry clinic. I did a little bit of research in social development lab. And then I took a year off to work on my applications for my graduate studies. And then I finished my doctorate in clinical psychology in 2020. So during that time, I did some clinical training in all types of things. I really enjoyed forensic and correctional work, but then I also wanted to expand my experience. And then I did a little bit of work with community mental health. So that involves working with children, adolescents, and their families. I worked with immigrants, like monolingual speaking Vietnamese folks, and then just the regular mental health or community mental health population. But then I decided to go back to forensic. So how I got here today, I did during my last year of my doctoral studies, I matched with LA County Jail and did my internship there. And then I got hired back as staff. And then during that time, I also wanted to get more experience in forensic private practice. And I actually found the supervisor that I'm working with right now through LinkedIn. And so now that's where I work, at the jail, and then forensic private practice, and I work with juveniles. But that's just a very brief blurb of how I got to where I got to. And I think it's going to be a little bit easier for me to answer specific questions. So I know that wasn't a lot of information, but I don't know what you guys are looking for in terms of what questions you guys are asking. And I don't want to offer too much information that's like too far ahead. So if anybody has any questions, they can ask.
So if you folks have any questions, you could raise your hand. I'll take one if you'd like to speak by raising your hand, and I'll also look at the chat too as well. We'll alternate here and there. But Samari, you have your hand up. Go for it. The floor is yours.
Hi, nice to meet you, Danny. I wanted to ask you a specific question as far as just like your occupation and, like you said, how you got there. I more so wanted to know, what do you suggest for forensic science, forensic psych majors? What do you suggest as far as like work after getting your bachelor's degree and taking probably like a gap year to work and get experience for your master's? Because I'm thinking about doing my master's in counseling psychology and or clinical psychology, because I do want to be a supervisory special agent.
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question, Shamara, and also the first question that I see in the chat. So after my bachelor's, when I finished in New York, I wanted to work in New York, but then I also eventually wanted to move back to California. So you guys need to make sure you look up the requirements of what state you end up wanting to get licensed in, right? Because it's very different. So if I had stayed in New York, I wouldn't have been able to do any clinical work with my bachelor's But then right when I was graduating was when you guys started the forensic mental health counseling at John Jay. And that has the requirements for you to have that as a terminal degree to do clinical work. So in counseling, because if you got your master's in forensic psychology, you wouldn't have been able to do any clinical work because there's no counseling, right? So that's good that you are thinking about getting your master's. The only difference between getting your master's as your terminal degree and your doctorate, which is where I'm at, is doing court evaluations. So if you want to do any psychological testing, any neuropsychological testing in terms of like the forensic work, where you testify in court or you work with attorneys or you turn in like these reports, right? That's the difference between. So if you want to do counseling and therapy only, then you can stop at your forensic mental health counseling. And then I think, what were you asking the other? Oh, clinical psychology. Just remember that in New York, the requirements for you to actually do face-to-face therapy, there are certain classes that you have to take under clinical psychology in order for it to meet the requirements. So that's what you just have to check beforehand. So that was my mistake when I did my master's. It's really hard to get a job to work with clients if it's because that's more research-based, right? And it's like theory-based. So then if you want to do counseling work, do counseling. And then does that answer your question, Shamara?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I did take a gap year. I took a year off between New York and California. I started working at a suicide hotline as like a staff or a staff counselor. And then during that time, that's technically counseling, but it's over the phone. So you didn't really need like to get licensed or anything like that. I did that for a year before I started my doctorate. And yes, you can become a supervisor. I don't know what the New York laws are, but as long as you get licensed, I think it's a couple years after that before you can become a supervisor.
Okay.
Okay.
I did want to, I'm sorry, I know you wanted to answer another question.
No worries. To everyone.
I did want to touch bases on more so like, because I'm in an internship now, right? And I'm in a law internship, but I do want to do forensic psychology. So as far as just like jobs go after getting my bachelor's, I know I may not be able to get a specific job in the field, but at least getting some sort of experience while I'm getting my master's, because all of them say that I have to have experience before getting the master's.
Which is crazy, right? Because we're like, oh,
right.
But then you're not gonna, okay. So I know John Jay, when I was there, you got to start talking to people. That was the only way that I was able to get that externship with Queens Criminal Court and Brooklyn Superior Court. Because then, John Jay has a really good reputation out there in New York in terms of networking. You find somebody that has, and sometimes you have to work for free or for like very little.
That's what I'm doing now.
Yeah, you just ask if you can shadow somebody, right? Just so you can get your foot in a little bit. Right. A day. As long as you have that, just be like, well, I shadowed this person for a day and I saw what they did. So I can't even remember what's out there anymore, but I know there was, if you can get my contact after, and then
most definitely.
I remember when I was out there, I can help you with that. So remind me. I can help you with that. Just remind me afterwards.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So how long did you take to get your master's after your bachelor's? After my bachelor's, I went straight into my master's and it took me 3 years, 2.5 years, I want to say, because I took an extra 6 months to finish my thesis. Alejandra, I think that was your question. And what kind of jobs were you able to get with just your bachelor's? Oh, I answered that there wasn't a lot out there for you to, you just can't do face-to-face jobs. Like it's gonna be more case management or sometimes like office admin, which is really unfortunate. But if you can get your foot in the door in any type of office that provides forensic work or something that you are interested in, just so you can see how things work, that will help kind of give you experience. So I did say that I worked at the suicide crisis line And I know that's not forensic work, but then you are exposed to a lot of mental health, and then counseling. So then that kind of helped me with my experience in getting into school.
Thank you,
How did
Gabriella, you can go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm a little sick, but
Oh, it's okay.
um, so you said you took a year off after your bachelor's, right?
Yes.
And then you started working in the suicide crisis line. How did that make you feel mentally working there? Well, how was your experience, and how do you feel like, just on the inside mentally? How was that on you?
Well, okay, so the type of work was really hard. It is still very hard. I still work for them, but as a floater, so I do take shifts now and then. I mean, for me, it was more of a personal thing to want to work on the suicide crisis line, just because family members who went through, hold on, who went through depression, or people who have thought about suicide. So it was more like a personal matter or motivation for me to work on there. But as soon as I started, the agency that I worked for is out here in LA. And even though it's a national hotline and we do take calls throughout the nation, there was a lot of support in terms of like getting like debriefing after every call, or there was a lot of training. Training is very intense before I even got to get on the lines. But once you get on the lines, it's just like talking to a friend that's in need, right? And trying to help them through that moment that they're in crisis. So whatever it is that they're going through, you just kind of like stand next to them and kind of hold their hand and lead them through it. So it was hard at the beginning, but then it's one of those things where if you don't talk about it with them, they're not going to be able to talk about it with anybody. And the reason why they're calling the suicide crisis line in the first place is because they don't have anybody in their network or in their support system that understands what they're going through, right? So you just got to want to be that person for them. So it was challenging at the beginning, but then the longer you've done it, like I've been doing it for over 5-6 years now, it makes you feel like, hey, you can actually make a difference in just one phone call. So mentally, it was more like difficult at the beginning, and then you get a hold of it and you're just like, okay, like it's very different work. So it's the reason why I volunteer and I don't even get paid for it anymore, and I still do it. So that says a lot about how much I love working on the line. You want to reach those people who are not being listened to, where they are. Does that answer your question, Gabriella? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Because I also heard before, like from another professor, I was like, since you work with like, just in corrections, how do you de-stress yourself? And then she said you have to find some kind of hobby on the outside that's unrelated to all of this, so that way you don't fall into different addictions.
Yeah, so work stays at work. I know a lot of people are asking about correctional and forensic. You're going to be exposed to a lot of heavy stuff, right? There's going to be a lot of things that you are going to come across, like abuse, trauma, and because I work with juveniles, so you're going to hear a lot of things with these kids, and you got to know where your boundary is, like what you could, because a lot of people can't work with kids who are involved with like sexual assaults and stuff like that, right? Like you just need to know where the bottom line is or what you can handle. And then once you learn, and you'll learn about all of this in grad school or when you get trained for this, like what you can handle, what you can't handle. And then everything stays at work. I know that's easier said than done, especially nowadays when you work from home. But once you close that laptop, that's it. Like you got to move on to whatever it is, to have that work-life balance so that you can come back the next day and be mentally available to whatever it is that gets thrown in your way the next day. But yeah, it takes a lot, but you'll get there. Like the fact that you guys are even in this major in the first place says a lot, because it's hard work.
Thank you so much for answering my question.
Yeah, of course. I know I don't know which order to get in terms of the chat, Edwin.
Well, chat, I got you.
Okay.
No worries. That's what I'm here for. I think you answered one of them. One student has, I'm a forensic psych major at John Jay. What path should I take to become a corrections clinical psychologist?
Okay. So let me talk a little bit about what I do at the jail. 'Cause I know I do two different types of work. I am a correctional psychologist, and then I do forensic psychology work. So then I'll try to tell the difference at the same time. So when you work in the jail system, I work in the mental health unit, which is essentially the psych hospital inside of the jail. The jail, unfortunately, is, at least LA County is the biggest psychiatric facility in the United States, and it sucks that it is a jail. So the way that it's set up, it's the same as the community, where there's different levels of care. So you're coming in and you're doing the same type of work you would if you were working in the community, except the individuals are incarcerated. So the severity of the mental illness is a little bit higher just because of the environment, right? Like if you're stuck inside a concrete cell all day long, like obviously your symptoms are going to be a little bit more exacerbated, and it's a little bit harder for you to deal because you don't have the coping that you do when you're on the outside. So if you want to, sorry, hold on.
Just a heads up, folks, any questions you're putting in the chat, I'm going through them in order. So I definitely will get to them.
Okay, sorry about that. So what happened, how you can get there is you do need to have your doctorate to become a clinical psychologist working in corrections. So after you do your bachelor's, you can skip your master's if you have the experience and the grades to go straight into your doctorate. And then once you're done with your doctoral program, you'll be able to work at any of the jail system, no matter. So you guys have Rikers, right? So that's one of them. And then I think the other one would be, I want to say Warden's Island. I don't know how many jails you guys have.
Oh,
Huh?
Wow. No, Rikers is the big one.
Yeah, so yeah, so
mostly Rikers.
So if you guys stay at John Jay, you can network, right? So then when you do your doctoral studies, just make sure that you choose your practicum and clinical training in correctionals. So that's always going to be inside the jail, inside the court, any individuals who's involved in the system. So I think out there, anybody who's in probation, right? So there's going to be a lot of agencies that's going to hire like interns for you to shadow, and then just make sure that you get that lined up so that when you are done with your doctoral training, and then you go on to internship. When you go on to internship, just make a list of different types of programs that are inside of the jail. So then that's, sorry, it's a little bit overwhelming because it's like a lot of information, but just make sure that you tailor your clinical training inside the jails or with people who are involved in the system. And then once you have that experience, when you are done with school, it's going to be easier for you to get hired on into like the city jail or into the county jail. Because I did my internship at LA County Jail. That was the only reason why I was able to get hired back. So I think that was that question. Thank you for that question, Jenny.
Another one is, what is networking like to get involved in forensic psychology assessment for the courts?
Okay, so when I was at John Jay, I took all of the assessment classes when I was doing my master's. So if you want to do forensic assessments or forensic evaluation, that's the one where you're looking at competency to stand trial, mitigating factors, transfer from juvenile to court. And even I think the big one at John Jay when I learned was the insanity, right? So that's something that you guys learned as an undergrad. So if you can take those classes and then shadow, which was what I was talking about in terms of the two courts that was in Brooklyn and Queens, the forensic psychiatry clinic, you got to talk to people and get your foot in just to shadow, even if it's just for one day. That's how you get your foot through the door. And then like you can get my contact information. I can try to network you with people, like whoever's interested later on down the line. I can also network you with people. How I found the forensic psychology clinic that I work right now is through LinkedIn. I think my boss just had like a job opening, and then I just applied, and because she used to work at the jail, that's how we network, right? Because she knew that my experience was at the jail, and then so she hired me on and then also because I went to John Jay, that was really important for me to have as a background too. So that's how you get involved in assessment for the courts. It depends on where you get trained on the school. I know it's a lot, but when you're in school and then you need to do clinical training, you just have to look for it and then sign up and then talk to people, which is the worst part when you're like an undergrad. But you talk to people and then they agree and then they take you on and then you'll be able to shadow. So that's really important.
Cool. That's good. Good response. How do you navigate providing adequate counseling for the inmates while technically working for the prison?
Are we talking about how do I put my differences aside on, I'm sorry, my dog is being very needy. Give me a second.
It's okay.
Are we talking about like, how do we put our differences aside when we're working with the people who are incarcerated? Or are you talking about like the environment? Because we do talk to them cell side. At least I talk to them cell side. So I just want to get Molly, are you in here?
Both.
Yes, sorry, I said both.
Oh, both? Okay. So it is a really interesting population to work with, and you need to make sure that you are able to separate what they were what they were charged with versus what mental health issues that they're dealing with. So if you're able to separate the two, that means you have to put your feelings aside, right? Knowing what you can handle, what you can't handle, what you can and what you can't handle to work with them. Because in the end of the day, like these guys, they are like, they're humans, right? And humans make mistakes. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. There's a lot of things you have to take into account in terms of how they were raised, the environment that they were raised in. It's very different from how you were, I don't know about you guys, but how I was raised in, right? So they weren't afforded the same opportunities, and sometimes the resources that are available in terms of mental health treatment, either there's barriers to treatment for them, or there's a stigma in their family, like they don't believe in it. So they're not getting the help that they need. And then so they end up in our jail system, which is really unfortunate because that's the only time they are able to get treatment. So that's what I tell myself every day when I go to work. Like in the end of the day, this could have been like my uncle, or this could have been like my cousin, right? Who just accidentally trespassed and now they're in jail. And like their symptoms are getting worse because of the situation that they're in. They're away from their family. They've never been here before. It's really hard for them to cope and manage, because LA County Jail is a really scary place to be. Like, it's cold, it's all concrete, it's dark, it's a maze. I still don't know how to get around it. I still get lost in it. And it's the way that it's designed, it's so you don't get out. So then it's scary. So I understand why these guys come in and they're having a really hard time. What else? A lot of them are substance users mixed with mental health issues. So they come off of the street either substance-induced psychosis, or they're withdrawing. And again, you have to think back. Why are they using? Are they using to cope with their symptoms, like to suppress their symptoms? Are they using to avoid something, avoid feeling, avoid not dealing? So there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration when you're treating these guys, because you just want to, I say guys because I work majorly with men. So you just want to help them get through whatever it is that they're getting through, putting aside everything that you feel to get them through the day, and then you move on. So that's one thing. The other thing is, yes, it's not very ideal, the situation that we are in terms of how we provide counseling. It's not, you sit down at a desk, you sit down on a chair. I do talk to them cell side, only because I work in the highest level of care. They're very sick. They are unpredictable. sometimes it's hard for us to kind of de-escalate them. They throw things, they throw like bodily fluid and stuff. So it's not very, yeah. So like we have to, they're not able to come out of their cell when we talk to them. So that's, we see them 3 times a week. So it's a lot of clinical contacts. A lot of times you're waiting for them to kind of be more stabilized so that they can have a conversation with you. And then it sucks because we do have to give them medication because it's a psych hospital. They're there on a 5150. So yeah, so that's that. I don't want to keep going on and on because then I'm never gonna be able to get through these questions. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Nicole, the floor is yours. I'm going to take one from the hand. Back to the chat.
Since you said that you do it south side, because that was the thing that my professor had talked about before in terms of like confidentiality. Are people yeah, is it, I find, wouldn't it be difficult to get anything out of them, especially if they're in such a public space, there's no
Yeah.
privacy?
So there's different levels of care. So I do cell side high observation, which is the next step down. They do come out of their cell and they do sit in like a milieu area. So they're cuffed to the table, but you're able to talk to them. But there's other clinicians talking to other clients or inmates in the other. So what we do is we do tell them, we give them the confidentiality blurb. We say, like, this is the extent of the confidentiality that we do have, which is not very much, but this is our situation and this is what we could do. So either you let it, you talk to us normally or you don't, that's up to them. Everybody who comes through the jail, at least at Twin Towers, which is the mental health facility, they are assigned clinicians. So a lot of them don't even want to be there. So they'll just sit there, they won't even talk to you. But then the other ones that do talk, they understand that there's limits to confidentiality because of the situation that they're in. And they understand that. It's very different from private practice clinical work because they're there because they have to be there. I think it's different if you do private practice clinical regular therapy when people are paying you. Limits of confidentiality is really important in that way. So you're not breaking it. You do tell them that there's limits and then they understand it. It sucks, but that's just the situation that they're in. Like we don't have the luxury of having offices, and even if we do, it's not safe for them to come out of their cell.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one for the chat. One was already answered. Are there any PhD or acronym Phys D programs in California that have a good reputation for forensic psychology?
Yes, there's a couple out in LA. There's some up in Northern California. I think forensic psychology has been becoming up and coming or more popular. You have to do research on the requirements of the licensure. Don't forget, that was like if I could do it all again, I would have looked up the requirements of the state that I wanted to end up with to make sure that I took all the classes required in order to get licensure. Most people who become forensic psychologists get a doctorate in clinical psychology with a specialty in forensic psychology, because in the end of the day, the clinical psychology encompasses all. So then when you come out and get your licensure and take your clinical exam, you need everything that is being taught under clinical psychology. If you do a forensic doctorate program, they specialize in forensic psychology, but you still have to take the same exam as everybody else. So you're going to be missing a lot of things in the licensure exam if you just take a forensic psychology program. But if Raquel, if you want to email me afterwards, I can give you a list of the programs that have a good reputation.
All right. There's another question about your typical workday, but I think you've answered that. What your typical workday's like. One is, do you feel like your master's was necessary in order to become a correctional psychologist?
Nope. If you have the grades and experience or just the grades in general to go straight into your doctoral program, go ahead. Try to get experience in research during your junior and senior year. The reason why I did a master's is I actually went to a community college for 2 years, and then I transferred to John Jay. So I was only at John Jay for 2 years before I finished my bachelor's, and I really enjoyed the school, and I didn't take all the classes I needed to take. So I ended up coming back for my master's to get more experience. But you do not need your master's in order to become a correctional psychologist.
There's another one from Genesis. Same boat as you were. I want to eventually work back home in California after I finish school. I was hoping on doing the forensic mental health master's program, but they are not offering it anymore. What would you recommend as far as master's and PhD programs if I want to work as a correctional psychologist in California?
So the difference so in California, you can work as a clinician inside the jail at a master's level. So if you want to do an LMFT, which is the marriage family therapist, that's the master's level in California, or if you want to do LCSW, so the licensed clinical social work, you can still work in the jail and provide the same type of work, but not have to go the full 5 to 6 years for your doctorate. Because if working at the jail is what you ultimately want to do, and you don't need to get your doctorate. The reason why I got my doctorate is to do my other position, which is the court evaluation. So if you are set on becoming a psychologist, then you do not need your master's unless you want more experience. But if there are PhD programs that you're interested in, I can send you a list through email. You just have to email me and then I'll do it for you. At least in California. I don't really know anything at other states.
So what organizations were you looking to apply to be able to intern or shadow for?
I will send you a list. If you want to plan in New York City, I had a bunch, like a list when I left. I don't know if they're still there, but then I can go ahead and do a little bit of research because I know a couple of my classmates are still out there and they got jobs. So I can send that because I can't think of any on top of my head right now.
It's fine. Hey, I expected. Did you have to take a physical assessment to work in corrections?
I had to do a medical clearance, but not a physical assessment. For the jail, you don't have to do it. I know for the state prisons and for state hospitals, it's a little bit different because I forgot which one is which, but you double up as like a corrections officer. So if something happens, you also respond. So that's another reason why I wanted to be at the jail, because if something happens, correctional officers respond, and then I walk the other way because I don't want to be involved in it. But I think there are certain institutions where you do have to respond, and then now you switch over to be a correctional officer at the same time. I think it's for state prisons. So that one, I think you do have to do a physical assessment. Yeah.
I don't know if you go too in detail, but soon asked, what was the most challenging experience you've had to go through? Given I don't know how specific you can.
Yeah, so I'll be very broad. It's the same thing as we touched on about like what's the most difficult part or how do you manage. It depends, like when you're working with someone who allegedly committed a crime against a child, that was really hard for me to work through at the beginning. So there were times where I needed a lot of supervision and consultation to even work through wanting to be able to work with this individual, knowing allegedly what they did. So that was I think that was probably the first time I ever cried when I left the jail that day, was probably that. But you have to separate your stuff with your work, because in the end of the day, like whatever happened with this individual and why they did supposedly what they did, like they were going through something, and it was also a mental illness that, it was like psychosis, right? I mean, I can go into it for hours, but these are the type of cases that you hear, like Andrea Yates type of thing. I mean, you guys have heard, I don't know if you guys have heard about that, like when women kill their children, like that's really hard. So that was probably the most challenging experience that I had to work with.
One asked, can they contact individually? If you can, please leave the chat your email. If you
Most definitely. I'll type it in right now.
Whereas what type of work would you be able to do with just a master's in forensic mental health counseling?
I don't know about out there in New York. We don't have that program out here. So I think you can work with children. I think you can do out here, you can something that's equivalent. You can work with DCFS, so Children Family Services. You can do probation work. You can do outreach or people who are coming out of the jails. You can do individual therapy for people who are being diverted from the system. So it's like a mental health diversion. Out here, you can also do sex offender treatment, which I know a lot of people can't do, but that was also very interesting type of work. What else? I can't remember, but I'll send you a list. Because I know, is there no more forensic mental health counseling at John Jay? Because that's what I saw someone tell me.
That's interesting. I haven't, it's been a year since I've not worked in the admission standpoint, but this
Okay.
is new news to me.
Okay.
I'm actually going to be at working tomorrow, so I'm going to find out from one of my colleagues who's a director of graduate to find out, whoa, what's this? Because
It
that's,
looks like there is.
Did you
yeah.
say forensic mental health counseling? Because that program is still active.
Okay, good.
I'm in that program.
Oh, okay,
That's what I'm saying. I didn't hear anything about cutting off.
it's just because I read something that says it's not offered anymore, but it's good that it's still there because it is so important for you guys to know that I didn't know back then that if you want to do clinical face-to-face work, you have to do the mental health counseling route. If it's just going to be research and you are thinking of a stepping stone into your doctoral program, then you do a master's in forensic psychology. So that's the two difference.
Oh, that's just the deadline. Yeah, that's the graduate admissions deadline. Yeah, I would think that'd be nuts if they cut that program out. It's very popular graduate program, competitive, yes, but I think the college will be crazy if we let that go down. Thank God that's not the case.
I read it wrong. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
What was the class that you said? It was mental health what that you just mentioned?
The program is the master's
program.
in forensic mental health counseling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for you, actually.
Yeah.
How was it the adjustment of going from New York to California? Is it as good as folks say? Because I've got a cousin of mine who's trying to get me to get out there.
I miss New York a lot. I try to go back and visit whenever I can. It's different. I grew up out here. I don't hate it, but it just so happened that my schooling journey landed me out here. If I could stay in New York, I would. But it just wasn't ideal at the time. But the weather's great. It's always great, 365 out of the year. But because I do work in LA, you still kind of have like the city life, but there's nothing like New York, you guys. I did my master's. I did my doctorate in NorCal. I lived in Oakland and SF, and that's still like the city, but there's nothing like New York. So if you guys could stay.
I was trying to sell it, but my children are not having it.
Oh, really?
My cousin of mine is an officer in San Jose Police Department, and I thought about it, and sold me lots of good stuff. And we were born and raised in New York, but he raves about it, loves it. But my children are now in pre-teenagers, and they're not having it.
I get it. I do.
I visited. I loved it. Definitely the case. But then again, of course, it's also vacation. So
yeah, I think the difference between the preteen kids is like, they are able to get around using the subway system and stuff like that. But the older you get, it's like, you just want to drive somewhere and you can't do that. And well, at least I couldn't do that in New York. So I think I missed the driving part and having like a trunk to go grocery shopping, stuff like that. But other than that, New York is great. California is great too.
it's different. Nicole, the floor is yours. Go for it.
Okay, my question is a little bit not complicated, but okay. So I get like assigned reading for some of my classes, and two of the books that I read were There's No Crying in Prison, and the other one is In the Belly of the Beast, which is letters from a prisoner named Jack Abbott. And the first one, it kind of depicted that, like, this psychologist that, really believed, like, like, and then after a while they got a little bit more not cynical, but like they were more wary because, they were tricked, there was a lot of lying, and the prisoners, like, quote unquote testimony, not like legitimate, but just like their account, right? And then the other one, the other book depicted a more corrupt and violent experience of prison, where everything they did was wrong, but the inmates were actually kind of working together, whereas the original book kind of made it so that it said there's no friends in prison. You don't have friends in prison. You have to like fend for yourself, kind of thing. And I'm not gonna lie to you, after I did want to work in corrections, but after reading the book, I was like, damn, because I was like, it didn't sound like. I mean, of course, it's just one person's, jail, or I forgot what it was. I think it was a state prison, but and it was just their experience, and that's them. But for a bit, it sounded like I didn't understand. For a moment, I didn't understand our point anymore, because it seemed like we were kind of looked at as like to take advantage of, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, of course not everyone's like that, but even when they ask you like a legitimate advice, you can't give them the advice you give them in community. You give them something like, this is how you adapt, because they have to adapt in the jail. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so how do you, like, I don't even know what my question is, but at this rate,
I
but
kind of
like,
get it.
do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Okay.
So I work in the jail, so it's pre-trial, right? These guys are a little bit more unstable. They're still trying to figure out whether, like, they're still going through trial. In prison, it's a little bit different because they've already been convicted. They've already gotten the treatment that they, so they're a little bit more stable in prison. So the therapy looks a little bit different from what I've heard. I've never worked in prison before. So what you're going to learn throughout your journey is trying to navigate somebody who is actually clinically mentally ill versus somebody who has a personality disorder, right? So that's like the people who have antisocial personality disorder. They're always going to try to manipulate or make it so that they can get through the system without, taking advantage
Thank you.
of it. So that's what you're asking, right? So then you just got to know your biases, and you just got to know to not let somebody take advantage of you. And there's a lot of training, there's a lot of supervision for you to get there. As soon as you hear something where you're just like, oh, this feels weird, that's a red flag. So yes, these guys, sometimes they do try to manipulate the system, including the people who help you, or the people who are wanting to help them, which is us, right? We come in and we want to help them, so they feel like they can take advantage of you. So I get what you're saying, but it also depends on, in the end of the day, what was your goal? What was your mission? Do you want to help these people, or do you want to just come in and kind of like see what it's like to work with this population?
Thank you.
Yes, what Gabriella said. Sorry. I'm like trying to narrow it down, but it takes a lot. And I guess you have to be thrown in it first before you can kind of figure out like what you need to do or what comes up for you.
I have to say, as a former officer, you guys deal with the hard part.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions, folks? Concerns? Go for it, Nicole.
Sorry. So
Mm.
from the readings that, or things I've been told, I know interdisciplinary collaboration is pretty important, like between the correctional officers and the psychologist department, and also the medical department, right? If that's the same thing. But so how is it for yours? Like, is it pretty okay? Is there any tension? How is it in your experience?
So we are basically guests in LA County Sheriff's Department, right? So we work in their house. So we're always going to bump heads. In the end of the day, you want to have a relationship with them, because when it comes to safety is priority. So you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with the sheriffs or the correctional officers and the medical. And then we also work with like recreational therapy or therapists. You want to make sure you have a good relationship with everyone, because it's going to be a treatment team approach. But you're with just like with any other type of work, you're always going to run into issues where you guys don't agree. So then we do have morning meetings every day. Deputies, custody staff, we call them, they do a ton. For the most part, the ones that are on our unit, they're very mental health savvy is what we call it. So they're very understanding when it comes to our patients. So they do try to help the best they can, and they're handpicked to be on our unit. But you're always going to run into the deputies who are very like, no, we are the enforcer, and they are inmates. They're not patients, right? And you're always going to run into that. But then in the end of the day, you have to think about what's your end goal, right? Your patient is the most important. That's your priority. So you got to do what you have to do in order to make sure that you're providing the best type of care for them. And that's also if you're running into issues with custody, sometimes you can talk to your supervisor to get past it, or sometimes you can just be like, hey, like, just help me out this one time. But they do have their own culture that they abide by. And yes, it sucks because, you just want to help your patient at the end of the day. But it's just trying to figure out, like, pick your battles, right? When it comes to that. Does that answer your question, Nicole? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
Here's one. How are your experiences working with lawyers and in the courtroom during trials?
So I don't do expert witness testimonies. My supervisor does that because I'm still working under her practice. But the lawyers that I have been working with, it depends on how you want to develop a relationship with them, right? If you want more, if you want to keep working with them and you want more referrals, you have to make sure that you set your own boundaries in terms of how they work, because they're super busy. They're turning over cases like crazy. So they work on their own time. Sometimes they don't respond to your emails, or sometimes they don't respond to your calls. But because I work with the juvenile population, the attorneys that I work with are a little bit more understanding when it comes to what you need from them and what you want to, what you need from them, and then how you communicate with them. So I can't speak specifically in the courtroom. I'm only speaking in terms of how I talk to them in terms of just the office work in certain cases. What is my supervisor's job title? She's a forensic psychologist. She's a forensic and neuropsychologist.
All right, folks, we have 9 minutes left. Feel free to jump in. You don't have to put your hand up. You can just unmute yourself and go for it. This is very fruitful, and this is great.
Yeah, and feel free to message me, or I can always have individual chats with everyone, just because I don't want to be too thorough, because I know a lot of people have very specific questions. So you guys are more than welcome to message me afterwards. Yes, I don't know. How do I do that?
I got that.
Okay, I'll just jump in. Since maybe you touched upon it, but I'll just say it. Since I'm also taking a year off because this is my last semester, so I'm taking a year off before starting my master's, just to be on the right track mentally and be okay and just start with all the energy for my master's. But is there anything I can do with just a forensic psych bachelor's degree? I know there's not much, but there's probably something I can do with it, isn't there? At least to get my foot in the door, some kind of experience.
Are you applying to the forensic mental health program, or are you applying to the forensic psychology program?
Mental health counseling program for John Jay.
Okay. So you're going to have to do a lot of free work and shadowing. I know there are some case management positions in New York City, if I can remember correctly, that you can do. So it's not necessarily counseling and clinical work, but you're still working with the population that you're eventually going to want to work with. So if you can look up like case management on LinkedIn or wherever you guys want to look up positions and see if you can apply to those jobs, or look up like forensic, I think they're called clinical externships. You can also do that, or you can volunteer at a psychiatric clinic. So anything that's gonna give you exposure to like people who are mentally ill, or people who have, who eventually will need counseling. So you got to figure out how to expose yourself to the population, even if you have to work as an office admin position. But look for case management, because I think that came up a lot when I was looking for positions out there after my bachelor's. Oh yeah, the EAC network. That's what I was thinking of, I think. But then I have to look that up. Okay. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Gabriella?
Yes, thank you. I'm gonna start looking up now because I just want to get out whatever job I have now and set my foot in the door.
If you guys network with me, as soon as I can figure out how to do my LinkedIn onto the chat, if you network with me and I see something that comes up that I think might be appropriate, I'll send it to you guys.
Thank you. I do have a question.
All right, breaking up.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, perfect. You've been asking, like, do students want to do the forensic psych program for a master's or the forensic mental health program? So I'm assuming that there's a difference. So apart from the jobs from the forensic mental health program, now what are you thinking about doing forensic psychology, and you wanted to work right after your bachelor's in order to gain experience for your master's? So
you're asking about the difference between the two program and the tracks, or your track?
Yeah.
So the forensic, from back then, the forensic psychology master's is a stepping stone to get your doctorate. So if you're looking for a little bit more research, you would do the forensic psychology program. So you can join the labs, the research labs at John Jay, in order to get research, because for you to do a doctoral program, you're going to need a little bit of research background, because you're going to have to do thesis and stuff like that, right? But if you want to stop at your master's, the forensic mental health counseling program is a terminal degree, and that's going to allow you to get licensure in New York for you to start doing clinical face-to-face work. From my understanding, if you don't want to go for your doctorate, you can stop at the forensic mental health counseling and still be able to work with clients and provide therapy and counseling, and not have to do research.
Interesting. Thank you, because I did not know that. I was so unaware of that.
Think about that, because a lot of people, they're like, I'm going to do forensic psychology, but then it's like forensic psychology is more like academia, like if you want to be professor, and then if you want to do the court evaluation, right, and become a psychologist, you have to go that way. And then if you want to work right after your master's and do more clinical and counseling, then you go the forensic mental health counseling, because that allows you to be licensed right after.
Okay. And that makes sense, because my professor last semester for my psych and law class, she mentioned that getting your PhD, if you don't necessarily want to be like an expert witness, or if you don't want to be in that kind of like field, or if you don't want to be a teacher, getting your PhD would kind of be like a waste of time. So you saying this now makes so much more sense. Yeah, and it's a lot of money. And then she said, like, at the end of it all, you still have to work to gain, for people to know that you're a credible source, so.
Yes, but that's all about networking, and that's all about work for the places that you choose, and developing your reputation, which you'll get there, but you just got to make that decision at the fork after your bachelor's, if that's what you're going to want to do, versus if you just want to do therapy and counseling.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome. Last question before we wrap it up. Would you say your time completing your PhD was worth it? It was my plan, but I'm getting intimidated by the whole process.
Yes, I wouldn't change it. If I went back, I took 6 years to finish. I took an extra year after internship or my residency to finish my dissertation. I haven't looked at my dissertation since. I'm not a fan of research, but it comes with your doctorate. But I would say that it's worth it only because I wouldn't have been able to get the position that I am in right now as in forensic psychology, working with court evals with the LA County juveniles and being able to go in there and talk to these kids in juvenile halls. I wouldn't have been able to get that position had I not completed my doctorate. And that was the end goal. I've always wanted to do court evals. So I want to say it's worth it, but I also want you guys to make sure that this, like what your end goal is, right? Which population you want to work with, because you don't want to be limited in the type of work that you do if you just finished at your master's, right? So if you want to do the court evaluation, or if you want to become work in academia and become a professor, you have to go all the way. And don't get intimidated by the whole process. Contact me, I'll help you through it. I do talk to students one-on-one. They do contact me on LinkedIn, and I do talk to them through it. So just if you feel intimidated, if you feel like you're lost and you need to get reeled back in, or you need to know what's next, just message me on LinkedIn, and then I'll help you do that.
I'll do this last one. Just right on. Sorry, I have one more question. Do you have any experience with or knowledge about police psychologists?
Yes. So every agency like NYPD, LAPD, LA County Sheriffs, they do have their own in-house police psychologists, right? So they're the ones that do fit to return to duty. They do, I think Edwin, he was a police,
Yeah.
he was a police officer. So I think he can speak a little bit to this, but then the work that you do as a police psychologist entails working with law enforcement only, right? So you're providing individual counseling, individual therapy. You're doing, if there's a person involved or law enforcement involved shooting, I think you have to get cleared to go back to work.
Yeah, it's more in-house. Yeah.
Yeah, so you have to go see the psychologist. You have to go through a certain amount of sessions before you can get cleared. There's also, when you apply to become law enforcement, you have to go through the psych eval, right? So the psychologist, which we do too at my private practice, we do the psych evaluations to clear for peace officer, for them to go on to the next step. Oh my gosh, there's so much more. So like, as a police psychologist, you also work with training. So then out here in LA, you do train the police officers on working with people who are mentally ill. You are able to pair up with the police psychologist or police to go out into the community to do crisis calls. So that's also another thing. There's just so many jobs that you can do as a forensic.
Do you need a doctor? One's asking, do you need a doctor?
Yes, become a psychologist.
You need doctorate.
Doctorate, yes, unfortunately, because you do evals. Anything that has to do with evaluations or mental health evaluations and clearance, you do need your doctorate.
Yeah, I've been through that process.
Yeah, so
you get grilled like a cheeseburger. So that said, I left pretty much close to tears at times. But it's necessary to make sure you're fit. What are the red flags that police psychologists look for when doing the police psych evals?
Integrity.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say much about it, but you can always message me after this, but we do look for integrity and consistency and honesty, right? And then whether or not you're mentally fit, that's so important. If there's anything in the past that comes up in terms of like, which sucks, because this doesn't mean that you can't become a police officer, but if there's any type of mental health issues that we know that can come up again when you become a police officer, or you can get triggered, we have to red flag them. It doesn't mean that you can't become a police officer. It means that you might have to take a year before you can reapply to get reevaluated.
Yeah, just FYI, any folks interested in that path, from experience, be honest, be totally honest.
We'll find out.
They'll find out. They will squeeze it, and it won't be pleasant. So please be honest. Many times I've seen folks who don't go on to the next step is they omitted something. Oh, I smoked weed 2 years ago, but I didn't think that was going to come up. Yeah, it's going to come up if they find an inconsistency. So integrity, honesty, those are big key components. You folks are, as you know, you guys are well trained to sniff that out.
We also look at interpersonal stuff too, right? So there, like, what is your intention in becoming a police officer? Some things come up in your, you know, MMPI or your psych testing that is a red flag in terms of like how you manage situations and what your judge of character is, like what your judgment is. It comes up, and if we find out that it's like something that's a little bit off, we ask you about it.
Yeah, no, be fearful about it. I mean, I'll give you my slight experience. Unfortunately, I had family members, we all lose some form or another, that weren't, you know, behaving themselves. But I was honest about it. It took a little longer. The process is they just want to make sure that you're not going to be that type of person, especially taking the responsibility of becoming an officer, because you are going to be carrying a lethal weapon. So, you know, it just takes a process a little bit longer, but just be honest. That's really, I can say, because if you're not that, and any folks who don't have their license, get their license, get some driving experience. Don't get your license and then go into the academy, and then next you know, you can't drive for licks. That's actually the fun part of it.
Oh, I forget that you guys don't really drive out there. I was like, what do you mean? You don't have
I had a student who was like, well, I failed. And I was like, what happened? Well, because my driving. I'm like, well, do you have a license? Like, but I just got it. I'm like, I mean, you're missing the fun part of it, but you need to get some driving experience with you. But with that said, you are absolutely right with all that. So just be mindful, folks. All right, I guess this concludes everything. Want to thank you for taking the time. Give a round of applause. Folks can do virtual claps. That'll be nice. Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us and out of your busy time, busy schedule, especially a lot going on your plate. So hope you folks all enjoyed it. We'll be having more of these series, more limited throughout the summer. So just be aware, and I'll be just sending information. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Thank you.
Take care. And if you need anything from me, you're more than welcome to email me.
Yes, me too.